Thank you very much for the introduction. And also, I wanted to also express on behalf of our board and our international team the appreciation of you all attending. Our Chairman Jung Kerr mentioned how the COVID has had an impact on all our lives, and not being able to re-engage and only remotely has been a challenge for all of us. We were all looking forward to this particular event so we could physically get together and share thoughts, ideas, experiences. So this is truly an exciting time for us all, something that, as I mentioned, that we've been looking forward to. So thank you. I also wanted to confess, it's always a hard act to follow when you start with a brilliant introduction by a managing partner here in Indonesia, Michelle, our chairman, and then the general. How is it possible to gain your attention now after such impressive presentations? But I'm going to try. As I mentioned to our new member firm, Alvaro in Spain, I only request two things. One, please don't laugh, and secondly, don't fall asleep. So on that particular note, I will present our global strategy for the future. This is a plan that the board has endorsed, and it also requires significant commitments and resources, not only from our team and our international team, not only from the support of the board, but from you all. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Now allow me, as you all appreciate, I always start with our vision and our mission. And as I've mentioned in the past, that is the cornerstone of our strategy. We do have to have a clear understanding in terms of what is it that we wish to achieve. What are our aspirations? And then we also have to have an understanding or clarity in terms of how are we going to get there, which is reflected in our mission. I'm not going to go through those details, you're well aware of it. I've presented this to most of you when we went through that engagement period, that period whereby I've tried to solicit, coerce, and if possible blackmail you to join our international organisation. And there, I believe I gave you a clear understanding in terms of what we were hoping to achieve strategically, and also to be satisfied or reassured that your own strategic aspirations were aligned to our international ones. And that is of indispensable importance, that we're all heading in that same direction. And our mission, as you can appreciate, is the stepping stones to us achieving our vision. This is what we've often referred to as the "and" strategy from your particular firm and practice, not exclusive. We believe this game plan will enhance your own strategic vision. It's not to replace it. And at the same time, the board is convinced this is an exciting opportunity, a window of opportunity that we wish to take advantage of. And that is focusing on where the opportunities are. Tagline, as was mentioned by Michelle, that is our tagline, is catalyst for success. So our international network is all about providing opportunities. It's far from what other networks and associations are, which are primarily clubs and associations, times to get together and share some war stories and everything else. Our objective is to create opportunities for your firms and your clients. That is our mandate. And Our mission, our short-term steps to achieving our vision is taking advantage of the opportunities we see today. And they are arising out of Asia, in particular China. So once again, this is the end strategy. This is not necessarily, to replace the plans and aspirations that you want to achieve. How are we going to do that? I'm going to share with you what our game plan is. And it is, forgive me for being fairly crude, it's chasing the money. Where are the opportunities? And our team internationally has spent a lot of time in researching that, identifying where China, in particular Asia, are investing today. Where have they invested? Where are they investing today? And where will they be investing? Identifying those countries, those regions. So fundamentally, we will have representations in those particular countries to service, ultimately, the firms and the clients. Let me go through some details. Clearly, when we're looking at membership, we've established 8 criteria for admission. And we're very, very clear in terms of what we want to achieve. It's all about quality rather than quantity. And this is where we differentiate ourselves from other networks and associations. It's not about ranking, as our chairman mentioned earlier. We mentioned FOF in particular. There, it's a question of quality. Reassuring ourselves and our network that that is very, very high in our requirements and expectations of members. So clearly we've established our criteria of admission. We're only 19 members because of the fact that we have such a high expectation in terms of what those qualities. We could have tripled in size if it was just a question of populating a directory or a global map. We've been very, very selective in terms of who we've admitted. And we're fortunate to have you all as our members, and at the same time we trust that you feel somewhat privileged as being part of our international network as well. Let me give you some background. It's not as if our strategy has only been trying to identify those particular firms that satisfy the criteria that are located in that respective regions and countries. As our chairman had mentioned, we have been approached by a number of international networks and associations. We have even had discussions where we've approached organisations where we felt, or it would appear, that their strategy, their aspirations align to ours. But what we've found, and this has been not necessarily a high priority of ours, but clearly we were looking at all options in order to achieve our vision. And these are the organisations that we have had discussions with. Some of them we've spent quite a bit of time drilling down, but really focusing in on and being satisfied that these organisations have the same vision and aspirations that we do. Or we do, I should say. And clearly, this has been what we've found in those attributes and what we've encountered and the issues there. And they're all the things that we have protected our own network about. It hasn't been about the rankings. More often than not, there's been a lack of clear leadership and direction. Inconsistent branding. Branding is just so critically important to us for all the reasons that I've sort of espoused over the years. There is very little generic value in their organisations. It was difficult to differentiate one of these networks of organisations from the other. This is once again where we differentiate ourselves. We have a clear strategy. We have a very clear value proposition. It was surprising and somewhat disappointing that these organisations, once again, confidentially, they just lacked all the attributes that we were looking for. So I'm sharing this with you so you can appreciate that we have looked at every opportunity in order to explore the possibility, could say, of achieving our objective. And we were struggling. And yet at the same time, I was so reassured and enlightened that we do have a rather specific value, something that we should recognise and also cherish. So it's extremely unlikely that our strategy is going to change, which then has reinforced, after going through this particular process and experience, our game plan is right. Our board is convinced that our plan is correct. So what are we doing? Now, please, I'm not expecting you to read this, particularly for those, very few of us here, senior people who are visually impaired like myself. This is really just to give you an insight in terms of, well, how are we going about developing and implementing our strategy? Well, as I mentioned to you, we're chasing the money. We're trying to identify where in particular China has invested, where they're currently investing, and where they're going to invest in the future. And our team has spent a lot of time researching this and identifying that particular specific information. And let me just, I'm going to give you the next slide, I'm going to give you some clarity in terms of what we're looking at, and looking at, for example, Latin America as an example. But we've gone through many, many countries in order to come back to identifying specific countries, specific regions, where we're going to focus in on. And it's, once again, it's following where China is investing or where China has a presence at the moment. Currently looking at Brazil. This is the information that we have at hand. And this is why we were so excited when our Chilean firm joined us, because they're part of our Latin American strategy. So Latin America, forgive me, might have 20, 30 countries. I should know. We're only identifying 6, 8 in terms of our mission. And similarly, we've gone through other regions and countries as we have done in Latin America. So you can clearly see that we have a very focused and specific sort of game plan. It is not, as I mentioned, forgive me for repeating myself, trying to populate the whole world here at the moment. It is very, very focused and specific. Partly because of the fact that, number one, we're clear in terms of what we're chasing at the moment. And this could be a window of opportunity, who knows, for the next 10 years that we're exploring the China-related opportunities. Once again, come back to our mission being trying to invite those firms, apart from satisfying the criteria, but also those that recognise the importance of the China-related opportunities. And you're all here today because of the fact that you all recognise it, which is once again reassuring, and you're still with us, and we are growing. So that's, to a certain extent, where our focus is going to be. So, as I mentioned, we've managed to gain that information throughout the world. And fortunately, we had that intelligence within our team in order to identify those. So these are the countries that we are going to be focusing in on over the next 5 to 10 years. In 10 years' time, and let me, guess here, the opportunities could be coming from India, could be coming from Latin America, could be coming from Africa, could be coming from the Middle East, could be coming from, continue to be coming from the States, and let's be realistic. When China and the US fall back in love with each other as they were 10, 15 years ago. But this is where we're focusing in at the moment, because this is where we see the opportunities. And clearly, I've listed the countries there. because they're the ones that we're going to be targeting. So, once again, how are we going to be doing this? That's well and good to say, right, Latin America, we know the countries that we're going, but realistically, we are a relatively, call it efficient, small international team. And that's partly due because of the fact the attractive levies that the international team is charging, we then have to be very, very frugal and efficient with our resources. But once again, the board has committed significant resources, supported by China in particular, to ensure that we've got the structure and the resources to implement this strategy. So we're now looking at it globally from a regional perspective. And these are the regions that effectively are part of our plan. Latin America, once again, that is a priority for us. And as our chairman mentioned in his presentation, that's where the growth has been coming from. There's been significant investments in Latin America, particularly Brazil, as you mentioned, seen in the first slide. We've got a list of all the clients, the SW China clients that are invested in Brazil, in Chile, in Colombia, Argentina, and the rest of the countries there. Secondly, Asia Pacific. We need to complete our presence in Asia Pacific. We need representations in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, beg your pardon, we have Singapore, Egypt, Bangladesh, Philippines. Similarly with the Middle East, is talking to Abdullah and Mohammed in terms of soliciting their support in strengthening our presence where we already have a presence in Egypt and now in Saudi Arabia. So they're effectively the countries that we're going to continue to support and also identify new member firms as well. This is the time frame. This is once again, we can't do all this, in one particular session. We are basically dependent on the resources that we currently have at the moment, and at the same time, we need to ensure that we've got the right people on the ground. So therefore, we're focusing in on short, medium, long-term strategies. Latin America is clearly high in our priorities. We want to complete Asia Pacific and then start exploring the next 3 years, the Middle East. And then essentially this is call it an implementation timeframe plan, which is going to be fairly fluid. That doesn't necessarily mean that if there is a country that basically is presented to us with the right firm, with the right criteria, that could be in, for example, Africa. It might very well be in our plans in 5, 6 years' time. Opportunities are never convenient. We will always seriously consider admitting the right firm with the right criteria, even though the timeframes may not necessarily be ideal from our perspective. Who knows? We may come across a firm in Italy who has an office in Lake Como. I'd certainly want to explore that opportunity there and spend some time at their particular practice and maybe come back with a recommendation after talking to my wife Nina as to whether in fact, do you think it's appropriate that we have a firm in Italy, particularly in this location? The structure itself, once again, is a fairly conventional structure. So we end up having to, once again, appoint people on the ground. And that to us is the very, very important decision that the board has made. And this is where the resources are going. that we need to have people on the ground that understand those particular countries, cultures. It's been explained to me not once. The differences in cultures in Latin America is considerable. Brazil and Chile and Argentina, you might as well be on the other side of the world from what I understand. It's just, for myself and my team to try and develop those opportunities remotely, we shouldn't even try. So therefore it's so important that we do have the right people who are locally based, who understand the culture, the dynamics, political situation, the commercial opportunities. Our role is to support them in the cultural understanding of the Chinese clients and develop relationships, and this is a clear aspect for our partners in China, develop the relationships with you and solicit your continued support that you have been providing over the years. Can't emphasise and thank you enough for what you have done to date. And I'm being very, very selfish because I'm asking you to continue with that support and development. What does this regional director look like? What are his roles or her roles and responsibilities? We're going into new territory. So therefore, once again, one of the priorities is helping us identify and recruiting the right prospective member firms that satisfy the criteria that I mentioned earlier. Cultural awareness, understanding. It's educating our international team about the local culture and understanding. And it's also international team with support from China is educating the local members, the prospective members, the partners, the staff. And we have a plan as to how we're going to be doing that, which I'm going to be sharing with you shortly. This role is fairly considerable, and it's a huge responsibility when you also think of the other expectations in terms of facilitating the referrals, the secondments, quality control, promoting the international brand. We're going to do it right. We need these people on the ground. We need the support of the existing and prospective member firms. So they're all working very closely as a team. We're envisaging that these regional directors will have a team that will be supported by the local member firms, both financially, commercially, and also in meeting these expectations. They'll be working very, very closely. So the actual firms themselves will have a significant role in developing these regions. It would be unrealistic for everyone to have an expectation that this is international's responsibility. You're only going to get the returns based on the investment and commitment that you're all making locally, something that you're all familiar with. The value to the firms are fairly obvious. I won't necessarily need to go through these in any great detail. They should be fairly evident to you all. And this, once again, is how and where we differentiate from any other network and association. And a number of us have had experiences with those networks and associations. We've made a change because of the fact that presumably this is what we're looking for. And this is the commitment the board is making to you all. We are very, very focused in terms of trying to meet your expectations and deliver, certainly, the value and the benefits to you all. It's going to be a win-win for us all. Allow me now to just briefly revisit our international secondment program. I want to also take this opportunity to go back now a moment. What we have done with the board's support, we have basically established an international secondment subcommittee, which has been represented by Madam Lee, who's had a very significant input in developing, reviewing our particular policy herself. Maurizio Cunel, who's not here at the moment, and Nick Michael. And Wendy Huam as well, who's had a fairly significant role. This particular team has spent quite a bit of time and met on a number of occasions to review our existing policy, to ensure that it meets all our member firms' expectations, and for us to implement a plan whereby it is operating and meeting the objectives of the subcommittee itself. We've presented that the revised policy and plan to the board, and they've supported it. At the Managing Partners Forum, I'm going to go into greater detail in terms of what that looks like, together with our international global strategy. I'm going to go into further details than what I am here today doing. Therefore, everyone can get a really good understanding in terms of the how, and admittedly the resources that we do need to actually implement that. But international secondment is a key ingredient to the success of our global strategy. Without stating the obvious, it not only should it meet the workload expectations of our respective firms where and if they're required, but it's also to establish a greater relationship between the member firms, particularly China and our member firms, and address all the issues in terms of developing a greater cultural understanding, both ways. And there is nothing more compelling when we end up sort of exchanging senior staff, and maybe possibly partners, and spending time with each other on work-related matters. There, under those circumstances, you really get a really good understanding in terms of what the issues might be and how we can work together in order to resolve them. The objectives I possibly don't need to go in any great detail. Once again, they're obvious to you all. Clearly, the difference, once again, I'm always looking for a differentiation in terms of what we have either done in the past or what other organisations are doing. But they're fairly clear in terms of what we are trying to achieve. And this is where, and if I can just digress a little bit, we were invited to this rather significant event in Madrid. Loreto and Alvaro, to their credit, and once again, we certainly appreciate they organised this special anniversary event between China and Spain. And we were asked to present. Loreto and I presented, and Lian Liang as well. And we ended up sort of, the actual issues and focus on the presentations was cross-international referrals. Both Spain, investing in China in particular, and the Chinese investing in Spain. And we had some very significant and major government officials, and also Chinese and Spanish organisations attending and also presenting there. And what I was asked to present on was the challenges that Western organisations, possibly Spanish organisations, encounter in investing in China. And my presentation focused on the cultural differences understanding, not necessarily language, but understanding what the expectations were and how one particular party takes a completely different approach to the others, and trying to open up people's minds as to how we should be thinking. And as the General had probably mentioned earlier, it is a question of understanding diversity and basically accepting it, and not necessarily coming back to a view that your thoughts and ideas are right as opposed to anyone else's. And it was interesting in terms of the response that I did get from the audience and also the senior ministers who were also presenting. I can't emphasise the importance of that cultural aspect enough. And if we're able to address that, that will create significant opportunities for us all. We've reviewed the policy. There has been a number of amendments which I'm going to be sharing with the managing partners at the forum in the next day or two. We're going to be going through all those issues. The structure itself of the subcommittee and the representations that are going to be required in order to ensure that this secondment program is going to work. And it does require, once again, a commitment from you all. Ladies and gentlemen, you will be pleased to know that my presentation hasn't gone for the last 40 minutes, and it's going to be a surprise to you all, I'm certain. At the same time, I am happy to take any questions that you might have on our global strategy, and even on our secondment program, if there is any at all. Oops, there's one over there. Could you maybe someone give him the microphone?
Hello. Thanks for that, Marco. I know you listed all of these attributes that you look at when we're trying to induct member firms. And we're probably not that big in terms of number of firms in the network at the moment, but I guess one of the things I struggled with at the other networks I was working with was, I guess, response from some of the other network firm members. So is there sort of I guess, program in place or some checks in place where you sort of ensure that the members that are joining remain aligned to those criteria? I had another one on secondment, but yeah, maybe.
No, that's a good question. Maybe I should have expanded on that. I've provided a list of criteria which I think is a perfect list.
Just one more.
But if I had to identify, say, the top two, I would say what I'm looking for, what we're looking for, what the board is looking for is leadership and a clear strategy in their particular practice. The other attributes that we've mentioned, scale, capability, cultural understanding, if you've got the right leaders and the right strategy, they can be developed with our support. So you will find from the presentations this afternoon from our new member firms, they're not significant firms, but they clearly have those two attributes. And we can give you some examples. We've seen the way India has developed. When I met Kunal and his partners going back 4 or 5 years ago, there were only 3 partners and a handful of staff. Look at them today. The other issue is that we need to be clear in terms of what the opportunities are. We may find that we end up having strength in consulting, in advising, and not necessarily have a large audit practice. That's a long-term play. But those services today are are still in significant demand with our existing and prospective clients. So the key is, what we're looking for is clearly, number one, leadership and strategic vision. So therefore, we can be reassured that, number one, their strategies are aligned with our international ones. And we have the leaders to develop the practice even further with our support. So therefore, it's not a question of ticking every particular box. If we can't tick the top two, then it's unlikely that the board would give consideration to admitting a firm. And that's what we've found most of the time. That's what we've found with international networks and associations that we've had discussions with. There was no clear leadership. There was no real strategy. It was all about rankings. It was all about growth. There was no clear understanding in terms of their brand. It was confusing. We are clear on those particular aspects. And the board is convinced, I'm personally convinced, that our game plan is the right plan. It's all about quality. It's all about ensuring that we've got the foundations for the right growth. Liu Jingwei, so pleased to see you.
谢谢 Marco 先生的这样的一个介绍，让我看到了我们国际未来的3到5年甚至10年以上的一个清晰的发展战略。那么在之前的张克董事长的一个介绍里面，那么看到国际的各个大的这样的一个机构的发展呢，实际上审计啊和传统的业务发展的速度都不是那么快，但是管理咨询有一个非常迅速的发展，这也是一个大的趋势。那么我是想问马可先生一个问题，就是我们信用中和或者 SW International 的董事会怎么样采取一些措施，能够帮助和促进我们各个成员机构发展他们的管理咨询，同时怎么样能够加强各个机构之间，包括与中国的管理咨询的一个互动，来促进我们这样的一个咨询专业服务能力的发展。谢谢。
Liu Jingwei, great question. Maybe we can address that after the session. Someone's going to translate Liu Jingwei for me. Thank you, Yang. I can't hear you.
Hi, Marco. Mr. Liu Jingwei's question is, right now, most of the member firms' business more about the traditional services. But right now, our strategy more like we want to develop the consulting services. Then, from the SW International Board level, how have you decided, or what kind of approaches you are doing right now to support all member firms to develop their consulting services?
Liu Jingwei, I always knew you would ask the most interesting, or one of the most interesting, and the most difficult as well. It is so important, and this is an issue that we have discussed at the board level, and I can't think of the countless discussions that our chairman and I have had on that particular topic. And we are starting the journey. We're starting the journey at this international conference, as you know. There is a consulting workshop where we are hoping to get an understanding of the various member firms in terms of their consulting capabilities, and also introducing what we believe the consulting capabilities that will, or consulting opportunities, I should say, that will be or are in demand at the moment, and whether in fact they do have those capabilities to meet the client's expectations. I've also had this conversation with Loretta, who is in my view, well versed in this particular line of service. In fact, her practice is a very impressive one, focusing mainly in consulting. It's unfortunate, and forgive me for not wanting to make you feel guilty, that Loretta can't make it to that particular workshop. But hopefully we'll get an insight in terms of her consulting strategy and the success that she has had, she'll share with us all. But this is a very, very important subject, and I'm going to even maybe introduce some of the issues that we are struggling with in terms of putting together an international consulting capability. And one of them is everyone having a clear understanding in terms of what is consulting. My experience is everyone's got a different view. And some people consider international tax advising or anything that is non-audit, that's non-traditional accounting service lines, it falls into the consulting. That in itself is a real challenge. When you hear individuals explaining that they're consultants and then you start drilling down and scratching the surface, trying to understand what that is, it's fairly generic. Once again, that's a real problem. The conversations that I have shared with our chairman is we should be reverse engineering this consulting landscape, understanding what are our international clients looking for in that particular consulting service line. That in itself then should be the start of us developing those capabilities internationally. And I'm hoping at the workshop these discussions are going to be taking place. So therefore, when a prospective client walks in your door and they're saying, well, clearly explaining what their strategy is and what their aspirations are in your particular country, you should, with confidence, be able to say, I can support you. I believe I'm able to assist you in you achieving your strategic aspirations in our country. That has to be done with confidence. You only get one shot at that. If you end up, forgive me, there can be difficulty in masquerading that you do have the consulting capabilities and you have little understanding in terms of what their strategic aspirations might be and how you can assist them. This will pose a significant challenge, not only for the prospective client, but also the referring firm that has introduced you to this opportunity. Once again, I'm hoping all these aspects will come out in the workshop. I don't have a solution. I'm hoping together we will be able to come up with the right play, with the right capabilities. And if we don't have them, a commitment that you will develop them. And if that's not possible, then you need to be very honest and open with the client and say, I'm sorry, I can't assist you. However, let me introduce you to someone who I have a relationship with that does have those capabilities. So Liu Jingwei, thank you for raising that question. It's very important, and I'm hoping Loretta's going to give us all the answers and make life easier at the workshop on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's no further questions, once again, I thank you for your time and I look forward to spending the rest of the conference with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, for insightful presentations.